Hello, welcome back to another episode of Show Up with Sarah. I am happy to be discussing mental health and substance abuse with Miss Colleen Ryan-Hensley. How are you doing?
I'm awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So for everybody who is listening or watching on YouTube, you are bringing a new system to place. You are a veteran. You discuss mental health. You discuss sobriety, substance abuse. Can you give us a little bit of a rundown? What made you decide, okay, yes, I'm getting into this. I want to be a really big advocate for this space, and I want to make this my mission, not just something that I discuss with people or I share my experiences, but like, why is this a mission of yours?
Thank you so much for asking me. It's such a great question. So I've spent the past 14 years as an expert in mental toughness and an advocate for mental health. And I really want to help people who are struggling with depression or, utilizing these escape tools. When I talk about sobriety, I really want to put it out there that redefining sobriety is part of this mission. When I talk about being sober, it's about a lack of intoxication from anything that you might be using as an escape.
Yeah.
And it's been a large part of my life for quite some time, this process that I'm now formalizing to share. But it's become part of my mission as I've realized how helpful it is to me to thrive within my own mental health challenges of depression, alcohol abuse, and post-traumatic stress from a military sexual assault that happened a couple of decades ago. Mm-hmm. So there's all of this language around mental health that I think when we update, I believe when we update for this next generation, it can help us see that we are able to thrive within our challenges. We don't have to just be a victim to them.
No, and I like you taking the moment to like redefine that because a lot of times whenever people talk about substance abuse or they talk about addiction, I should say when people discuss addiction, they always kind of lump it to alcoholism or narcotics, right? And there are so many different types of addictions that people deal with. And so if you are someone who has an addiction that is not drugs or alcohol, and you either go to open up about it or you are trying to discuss it, it can be that you're pretty quickly shut down or feel like you don't have a space to speak because you don't have the typical addiction, right? And so I like the fact that you're saying like, let's redefine this and let's open it up, which is super cool. Because as a recovering sex addict, I've been in that space where if I say, oh yeah, like I'm in recovery, people are always assume drugs or alcohol. Yeah. And then if you try to explain something different or feel like, oh no, like sexual addiction, whatever, people will be like, I mean, like, what does that mean? Like, and people, I think that I get it, because when people don't understand something, they have a lot of questions. But at the same time, if someone says, oh, I'm in recovery and I'm an NA, let's say, then people don't usually go, oh, what's your drug of choice?
Right.
Like how, like they don't start prying into it because they understand it and they respect it. So I really like the fact that you are understanding and you're trying to promote, we don't necessarily have to be like super specific. And it's different for this new generation.
Absolutely. I mean, think about the access that we have to all of these things now. And you nailed it. Like, if we're not creating a space to talk about these things as if they're normal and not just something that, we put into our habit patterns and we're just all used to it, right? Mm-hmm. So we're just all used to it. So there's nothing wrong with it. And that could be very different from each individual who uses whatever that tool is to escape. Like, I could be fine, binge watching TV all day, but somebody else, that could really impact their depressive symptoms.
Yeah.
Or, there's lots of different examples like that.
Yes. No, it is. And it's tough. I was just speaking to a client of mine and she was saying it's really hard to do anything that doesn't revolve around food or alcohol. Mm. And everybody's kind of go-to is, oh, let's grab a drink or let's go this and And it is one of those things, like, how is it that alcohol is, I mean, it's such a big issue in our country, or in the world, I guess I really should say, alcoholism, but yet, like, everything revolves around drinking.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with like food. If someone has an issue with how they eat, or and their relationship with food, everything, you know, like, it's odd to be like, we should just go for a walk. People are like, what are
Right.
you know, like,
I mean, I would love that, but
yeah, yeah. So for you, and kind of going off of what you mentioned, having a traumatic situation that took place, do you feel that you're processing it, recovery from it, and living with it, a part of you, do you think that has been, going through that yourself has been a catalyst for you to be able to understand other people more? Or have you been able to use that as a way for people to see, okay, you know, she's been in some places that maybe I've experienced, and the way that you're able to share, does that allow people to really resonate with you?
Sarah, it's something that I'm still getting used to. So yes, I hope so. I hope that, you know, the healing that is something that I feel, the more and more I talk about it, I hope that other people will also benefit from that, right?
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
that's the hope. But it is something that's fairly new to me, and it's pretty scary, and it's not easy, but there's a purpose behind it. And a lot
Yeah.
of that with hashtag binging sober, a lot of where it came from was I was in the military, where mental toughness, or I like to call it the 90s version of mental toughness, like this grit and some, you know, rub
Yeah.
some dirt on it, get back in the game. There's a
Yeah.
place for that, especially in the military, where we always have to be mission ready. But it really, looking back on it, and it's a long story, but looking back on it now, my mental toughness was in the way of my healing from that for over a decade.
Mm-hmm.
So I really, you know, I keep talking about redefining things, but redefining mental toughness to include feelings and emotions and thriving well, not just in everyday performance in everyday life, but within mental health challenges as well. Like, mental toughness includes taking care of your mental health. And that's, you know, hasn't been a part of that language yet.
Do you think that the way that we look at mental toughness is a discussion of, um I should or I should not, or do you think it's more an idea of compartmentalizing and kind of just putting things away because of the duty that's in front of you, or where you have to mentally, emotionally be in order to carry out a task, whether that is in the military,
Right.
or if it's like a single parent who has to
Yeah.
get the kid
It's a good
to school,
example.
right?
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on that?
Compartmentalization, like that is how I have worked with other people talking about mental toughness, and that seems to be the idea, and that's what I talk about, the outdated concept of it, you know, is to compartmentalize, but to have emotional regulation and these other things that should also be a part of mental toughness, to then go back to those things that you've put aside and actually do the work to adopt new practices or ways of thinking, or you know, grow within those challenges and address them, not just keep them compartmentalized. Because that was my experience, is I'm going to bury this, I'm going to forget about this and bury it, and it'll go away. And that's not what happens.
Yeah, this is true.
Trauma, which, you know, all of us, I mean, I believe that all of us experience trauma, because it's part of life. It's how our brain perceives it that makes it a trauma. So it could be like any, you know, a child losing a pet, you know, it could be very, very traumatic to that child. So it's very individual again, and burying it and avoiding it never, it just doesn't help.
Yeah.
So,
well, and there's a big difference between compartmentalizing and what I like what I've heard, and I like to say, like, shitting all over yourself, because like they're compartmentalizing is actually being able to like pack it away and not feel it. and and decide when you're going to feel it or experience it. Shoulding is just when it's rising up and you're saying, I shouldn't focus on that.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily you pack it away, you're just kind of brushing it, like forward
Yeah.
pretty much. So yeah, I agree. I think that a lot of people compartmentalize potentially better than they realize.
Yeah.
What I talk to my clients about is when you try to compartmentalize and it overflows, or you actually haven't really packed it away that well, and it's starting to show up in little ways. And I tell people all the time, I'm like, someone who is healthy and has a handle on themselves and is self-aware, if something upsets them, they tend to be able to like receive it and go and be like, why did that bother me? I was like, the person who spins out and reacts super aggressively,
Mm.
like flips a table, I'm like, more than likely, if I see an anger reaction like that, I'm thinking, oh, there's something is overflowing. And
Yeah.
and like,
Good
and you're
point.
just, like, which I know you probably have had experience with, because being in the military, it is, I know a number of military people, and yeah, like, it is a very strong compartmentalize, like, show up for the duty and do what you have to do.
Yeah.
And I do know that within the military space, and I don't necessarily want to speak, because obviously that's something that you have more experience with. And I'm sure that's not, or I'm sure, I know it's not your entire identity, but I know that substance abuse and addiction are big in that space, and so for you and your history, let's get into this binging sober.
Mm.
What you Actually, you know what, let's just ask straight up, what is binging sober? Let's step back a smidge.
So it's the world's first point system for vitality. It's launching in January 2023. And it's really, like I was saying, a formalization of a process that I've used for a couple of decades now. And I'd love to go in the history. We
Mhm.
have a minute. So that you're able to really use, I've heard you say hyper awareness. Yes. I mean, it's very much about awareness, control, and balance of the things that we are using to escape and how they affect us. So it's really gaining a keen sense of awareness of how each of these things impacts you, either adds to or drains your energy. And I keep saying you, because it's a very individual thing.
Yeah.
It's not like a one size fits all thing. And I'm not promoting complete abstinence. Now, there are a lot of people, myself included, that sometimes you need that, and you need that professional support. And there are lots of resources out there. This is something for the sober curious, or for people that feel like they do have a vice or something that they're leaning too hard on,
Mhm.
and maybe keep having that thought creep in, like, wait a minute, I don't feel very good. I'm really tired. What are these things that I'm doing, and how are they impacting me? So it's a way to track all of those things throughout the day, week, month, and really keep your energy in check.
I
So
like
it's
it.
owning it, like owning
Yeah.
all of those things that we may be habitually doing, and they're so recognized in society as just part of the way things are, that we don't necessarily pay attention to the long term, either the immediate and the long term impact of those things.
Yes. And so how did you develop this point system?
Yeah, thank you. So
Yeah.
trigger warning for anybody out there who has been impacted by trauma surrounding sexual assault, but that is a part of this story.
Mhm.
I was 22, so 22 years ago now. I was in the military, and I was blacked out drunk. So I had lost the foundations of what are now binging sober: awareness and control, like all of those things. So a big part of this for me is preventative, with people owning themselves and what they're ingesting and what we're doing in the environments that we're putting ourselves in. Like, preventing that sort of thing from coming into your life is a big part of this for me. But So I was raped by two of my friends that I trusted, and I was at a party where other people most likely saw what was happening and didn't do anything.
Mhm.
The next morning I woke up in that same house, and everybody was asleep everywhere, and I was, it was all coming back to me, and I took full responsibility for having had too much to drink. Nobody forced me to do that. There is a lot that I'm learning about that sort of assault that's coming out now and being talked about more, and that is what is now being called a gray rape, or something where boundaries. Have you heard this term? Something where boundaries are like so gray, so like there's confused boundaries. So there's maybe not a no that's said. So it's not considered to be, a rape, whatever. So I'll go back to that, or back to what happened. So I didn't report it. I went home. I went to training it was the next day, went to training where all of them were the boys at the party. And I went into the room that they were coming into class. I went into the room after I'd had like a mental prep session on my own. And I stood in front of them as they came in, and I said, I know what you saw, forget it. And if I hear you talking about it, then I'm going to make you sorry. And I asked them if they understood that. And I left and buried that memory so deep, it didn't even come back to me until I left the Navy.
Yeah.
But during that time, like we were talking about, that toxic energy from trauma that you're trying to avoid and compartmentalize is going to come out. Like it started to come out. I was seriously abusing alcohol, which was also a part of the culture, really, just as it is in American society. It's such a part of the culture that you're like, oh, whatever, I'm just part of the crowd.
Yeah. Having fun, being young. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just, so abusing alcohol, just destroying relationships. I didn't trust anybody. I was mean. Like I was just mean, but I didn't see any of this happening. So then we would have periods where I was on a ship. So we'd have periods where we would be out to sea for a few days, a few weeks, a few months, what have you. Well, during those times, I didn't have those tools of escape that I was using. There was TV available, video games, those sorts of things, but I was choosing to work out during those times and read books and all these other things that I made more time for while I was at sea, and started to notice this serious like shift in my quality of life between being out to sea and being at home.
Yeah.
So that was where Binging Sober was born, was that sort of dichotomy between my quality of life in both of those situations. And again, it was beyond my awareness. I mean, it was in my 20s. Like I wasn't really, aware of what exactly was happening. But outside of the Navy, when I got out in 10 years later, I started to think about that, like how much I craved the life at sea. Now, of course, you're traveling and there's all these other awesome things that come with that, but it was more of laying off those things that were draining my energy. So I started to do it again, and really keep this whole time on the ship and afterwards, I would journal and keep notes of how things made me feel, and down to the little bittiest thing, like sweet potatoes. I don't know, like what, just like everything I was doing, because I had the time and attention to do it. And that is eventually what came to a few years ago. And I really started healing from the trauma, because I finally said it to my therapist and, released that, and then kept working on it. And then these periods, really adopting this process myself and seeing how much of an impact it has on my quality of life when I'm keeping all of those things in check.
I love all of that. And I think that I was just thinking about times where I've heard friends, or people I know where they're like, oh yeah, when I'm off doing this, it's just like 3 months of like really working out. And actually, you know what? The specific example I know is a friend that was in the military, and whenever he would be stationed overseas, it was just working out and eating and
Yeah.
seeing what he could push his body to do, like
Yep.
physically, right? And reading and all that type of stuff. And then when he'd get back, it was, you know, fast food and going out. And so every year is this pendulum of like 9 months of just like banging it out and being super disciplined and growing and being really clean, like
Yeah.
clear-headed and clean. And
Yeah.
then having 3 months of just like throwing it all down the drain practically, you know, like and
There's a
it was,
middle ground there somewhere.
yeah, you know, like, but I think it's the thing that we kind of enforce without really thinking about it in our culture of, when there's time to be focused with work, and then there's time to be focused on like release it all and have a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And that's what you should do. Like you should let loose and, like all type of stuff. Like, I don't think that we really like, I mean, it's becoming more and more now, but I don't think that we discuss as much of like, technically there's just like a balance. Like you
Yes.
can just, like
Yes.
it doesn't have to be like hyper focus and then hyper focus and then hyper focus and then hyper, like it's,
Yeah.
so yeah, I like that you even mentioned that, because I think that there are probably people who are listening or watching that can understand that. I mean, what if we look at it on like a microcosm, like people do that every week. They go to the gym and they go to work and they walk their dogs or whatever, and they go to bed at 9. And then on the weekends, like starting on Friday, they just binge drink.
Yeah.
Because, like,
Binge watch, binge
yes,
everything. Yep.
it's because it's what you do, right? Like,
Yeah.
but it's what you do to get through potentially if you're not that happy during the week, or if you're not really
Yeah.
fulfilled, or
Yeah.
because people I think that are decently fulfilled, they're not champing at the bit for Friday to
Yeah.
go get drunk,
Yeah.
like, okay, so you have this vitality, the point system, and it's launching in January.
Mhm.
And so is this something that people they work with you specifically, they sign up, it's a group? Like, tell us a little bit more about how it works.
There's a little bit of everything. With this sober curious movement happening, I would love to go back to what you just said, like about, the weekend, like
Yeah, please.
just going crazy. Well, going back to the redefinition of sober, I think that first of all, if you're drinking on the weekends, there's this common misconception that like you're sober within, like when the alcohol leaves your blood alcohol, right? And your blood alcohol levels, when they go down, you're sober. But that's not true. I mean, as I'm sure that whoever is listening, you might, relate to the fact that when you were 20 and had a glass of wine, or 21 and had a glass of wine, versus when you're my age, 44, and have a glass of wine, very different effects. And I've noticed that it can stick around 1 or 2 glasses for a week, right?
Yeah.
So I love this idea of sober curious, not with just alcohol, but again, with taking time away from our escape. Because what I believe wholeheartedly that we're not understanding is that sober is a beautiful, joyful, blissful place. It's just, we spend so much time avoiding it and avoiding those feelings that we don't know.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, no, I agree. I know that whenever with my clients and me personally in my own journey, like I always tell people, listen, like we're going to work together, and then you're going to think that you're wasting all of your money because things feel worse. And I'm like, and things will just feel worse. Like when you take away the things that we use to escape or to avoid, then things suck at first, because you're like, wow, this is how I talk to myself, or this is what like crap. I'm like, and then while you're working through it, it may still just get worse for a while. And I'm like, and that really sucks. But that's also like kind of what has to happen. It's the same as when you are hungover from the weekend, and it sucks to be hungover, but you have to get through it to feel mildly okay. So yeah. Yeah.
So there's a community, there's going to be a large community around hashtag binging sober. More information on that is at my website, ColleenRyan-Hensley.com, if you want to join and get updates. But there's also going to be like, you can go through all of this yourself in January. There's going to be PDF downloads, you know, for self-reflection and, you know, taking yourself through the program, but I'll provide videos and things like that to guide. So yeah, a little bit of everything, and it'll, you know, ideally just grow organically into what it's meant to be. But a large part of the sober curious movement, I think, is people wanting to have community when they experience the uncomfortable parts that you're talking about, the parts where it sucks. Like, you need to be able to talk about that and relate to people on that level. Like, I've unplugged my TVs for the next week, and I'm, you know, I do that every now and then, and it's horrible. And I call my, you know, best friend, and I'm like, I just want to, you know, zone out for a little while. But it's so important to take that time away from those things to know what your natural state feels like, which is so good, which is the balance that we talk about. I believe it's that it's not necessarily this like this idea of what happiness is one of those things I think we allow society to define for us, and we never actually take the time to say, wait a minute, what is it for myself?
Yeah.
Like, and when we talk about balance and this scale of vitality, which is the tool that I'm using with hashtag binging sober, like if you see the 0 on the scale, right? The balance at 0, I've found that sometimes I feel amazing at a -1.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, sometimes if I'm feeling a little sad or depressed or I have the blues, like, that's okay. I feel content in that moment. Why can't that be my happiness? And I think it's that expectation of happiness that we allow other people to create that is a large part of our depression in this world. This unattainable idea of what it is.
You know, I was just talking to a client again about the idea of what success even is for people, and the fact that like most people just don't even know what that looks like or feels like for them. And the unfortunate thing is that if someone doesn't know what success feels like, they are only hinging on what it looks like. And if we're going with the societal push of what success looks like, if you're so far from there, then even if you do feel good, you're like, but I have no reason to, because I'm you know, like,
exactly.
And I'm like, because I was discussing it in the form of discussing like power. And I was like, there are people who, you know, and this is actually on just the last interview I did. There are people who like, so I mean, and I'm sure that you can relate to this, you know, I played collegiate volleyball, and so I'm like, you know, for 4 or 5 years, almost every week I got to feel what it is to like feel some power, you know, like, and like be out there and be the one with the ball in my hands, and everybody's paying attention to me about to serve the ball, and like I'm the center of focus for tons of people in a gym, right? Like, and that can be a powerful feeling for some, you know, like, and I'm like, and so in my life I definitely have experienced moments where I feel powerful, and I'm like, but there are lots of people who, if you ask them when's the last time you felt really powerful, they may not be able to point to anything. And so again, they think, well, I assume this is what power looks like. And I'm like, it's really hard. It's really, really hard to talk to someone and say, hey, like, you should own your power, or you should look at balance in your life, or you should think about like what sobriety is for you. And all they have is an image that they have never actually felt. Because then it's, you know, like what I was saying is, if you are asking someone to consider, like back when I was really deep in my depression, if someone was like, well, I know that you're going to meet someone, or you're going to be really happy, or this, that, the third, I'm like, you might as well be trying to describe the color red to a blind person. Like, I cannot feel at all what you're saying. So you're just saying words, you know? And so I think that for a lot of people, and probably, you know, this point system and binging sobriety is going to be a really cool thing for a lot of people, of it's not leaning into an image of sobriety, because I know a challenging part of sobriety for some people can be, so I never drink again,
Yes,
and they
that.
get stuck
Yep.
there, right?
Mhm.
Um, because they're thinking all the way down the line, and they're
Yeah.
thinking to the extreme because it's really scary, right?
Uh,
But the idea of, oh, so like I get a point for maybe just like taking care of myself a tiny bit.
mhm.
Like, how did that feel? You know,
Yeah.
like, and
Yeah.
that's what sobriety as a whole is.
Yeah.
It's feeling yourself. It's being present in
That
your own
feeling,
experience.
like, we've come a long way, right? My parents, when I was suffering from depression in my teens, I mean, they didn't talk about feelings. No, it
Mhm.
was just generational. It's not, I'm not blaming them. It's just not
Yeah.
where we were. Now, now we're getting there, and just our common language in society. I love this, when people say, I'm in my feels, or I'm feeling some type of way. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we're
Yeah.
getting there, but what type of way are you feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We're not, like, it needs to be okay to feel things, and then put a name to it so that you can
Yes.
actually, maneuver yourself through your day. It's so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. And I mean,
Yeah.
that's honestly all sobriety is. I'm so present in myself
Present.
at this
Yeah.
moment
Mhm.
that I can identify that I feel something, like, and
Yeah.
that's, and so yeah, I think it's really cool. I think this is very cool.
Yeah.
Because it really broadens the conversation.
Yes.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Just to put like a timeline on it, I've realized that it just takes a few days. Like, it just takes a few days to really feel what that natural state of sober, of joy, of bliss, of vitality, like that natural place. It just takes a few days. If there's chemicals involved, it might be a
Yeah.
little bit longer, but even still, like, it a few days, you start feeling like, oh, that's what we're going for here, that feeling.
Yeah.
What happens, what I've noticed, why I think it's so important to share, is that the longer 10 days seems to be another big turning point. But then, and I'm talking about, this is where the language can get a little bit confusing. But, like, let's say, for example, I'm taking TV out this week. Like,
Mhm.
that it's kind of like a reset. So it's tracking points over time to see where your levels, where you feel your best, and
Gotcha.
what you feel your best doing versus avoiding. Or let's say I choose to have that glass of wine. What other things can I do? Like, what do I know I can do to reverse that impact going into tomorrow and my energy level tomorrow? Well, I
Yeah.
can stop at one glass. I can drink a ton of water. I can, meditate. I can go for a walk. There are all of these things that we can do that, okay, if you're telling me I can't have popcorn, that's all I'm going to think about, Sarah, is the popcorn. So it's a matter of, that moderation, and just really paying attention to ourselves and what makes ourselves feel good over time.
And what you just said actually also reminded me with the idea of recovery, especially, and um A programs, like AA,
Mhm.
NA, SAA. Um, I think that this could be a really useful tool, the binging sober and the point system, because I know that those spaces can sometimes be like kind of gatekept.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, okay, if someone is let's say someone's an alcoholic and they're like, well, I'm gonna have a glass of wine. Um, and what can I do so that I'm not getting drunk, or that I can like, and I was thinking in a traditional sense, someone's gonna be like, well, maybe you're not an alcoholic then. If
Yeah.
you can have a glass of wine and you can stop
Right.
after one or two, right? Or, well, then you are relapsing. Like, it's very
Yeah.
black and white.
Yes.
And I know that there are people who it would be considered alcoholism if you are sober Monday through Friday, but then you get blackout
Yeah.
drunk Saturday and Sunday,
Yeah.
right? Like, and so that's obviously someone who can have restraint on not drinking for 4 or 5 days.
Right.
And so it's interesting because, like, so within the SAA, sobriety is so specific to each person. Some people can watch pornography, some people can have hookups, some people can have one night stands, right? Like, and so it's also different. And I
Yeah.
was just thinking about how, like, this point system may be also a good space for inclusion on what your sobriety also means for you.
Yes, I love it.
As opposed to the idea of like, well, if you're here, you don't ever drink. And if you
Yeah,
do, you're not
yeah,
really an alcoholic, or
right.
you're not really in recovery. Like you like
Yeah,
to say it. Because I've heard people in recovery say things like that. Oh,
yeah.
that's just someone who likes to say that they're in recovery. But I mean, no.
When really it's a spectrum of things, and like you said, the understanding is just very, very individual.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I love what you're doing. It's very cool.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Before we go, or before I get to my closing questions, is there anything else that you want anybody to know?
Hmm. I love I heard you talk about power before
Mhm.
and how it's a sonar.
Yeah. Yes.
I think that is so important, is just having that power, or that the ownership, just taking ownership. I know that self-awareness, you're never wholly there, right? I mean, we're constantly changing and growing.
Yes.
So this idea of power or control or ownership of your life, it's a practice. It's not something that is ever going to be perfect. It's just something that when you continually practice, and whether you step away, I mean, gosh, I have bad days, of course, and everything gets thrown out the door. I'm just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I know,
Yeah.
which is very frustrating, but that's okay, because you can step back into it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I really want to, hammer that home. This is all of personal growth is a
Yeah.
practice.
Yes, it is.
It is continual. It's constantly moving. It's going to go up and down, and it's just a matter of, of enjoying that process, and not
Yeah.
being so hard on ourselves, and being graceful with yourself. And so I just hope everybody will check out Binging Sober in the new year, and give it a shot, and it won't disappoint. Like, there's always something to gather from taking that time and attention for yourself.
This is true. Okay, so last questions. How do you desire to better show up for others?
Ooh. Well, I really talking about things that don't necessarily they're not easy to talk about, but I feel the more that we do talk about these big challenges, I mean, we haven't gotten into the big taboo topic, but like talking about these challenges, I think, are super important to changing the narrative and the story around these big kind of roadblocks to personal growth that exist in our society, that have become so much a part of our society that we are not seeing them as roadblocks. And I think that the more we have these conversations, the better. And that's how I hope to show up, is by being as personal as I possibly can with my experience, and communicating that as much as possible to hopefully teach the next generation to prevent some of those things from happening. Mm-hmm. And then also to continually evolve and grow as humans together.
And what is the topic that we didn't touch on?
Suicide.
Oh, okay.
Suicide is, the ultimate form of escape. And I know that it's something that we don't say enough. Mm-hmm. And people get uncomfortable if you do say it, but therein lies the solution. Like, we need to start talking about it as a spectrum. I mean, there's a spectrum of life, and that's something that, people take into their own hands. And we tend to talk about it as like caught in a downward spiral, where that person was caught in a downward spiral, or they were struggling for so long. Well, takes all of the responsibility and power and ownership off of that person. And when we talk about this downward spiral, we need to start talking about the upward spiral, which is what we've been talking about the past 30 minutes or so. Yeah. There are things that you can do that you can, learn to thrive within those challenges, and hopefully create that space between that act and not doing that act, to where you can turn around and see, see where to go. I've struggled with those thoughts myself, but now I've come to a place where it's a giant red flag. Like, hey, why are you even thinking about this? What did you do to your, like, what have you put in your body? What are you doing? Stop, take notice. What's happening? You know? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you're right. That is it's a very big topic.
Yes.
And so it's hard to like backtrack a little bit, but no, I definitely, I've have spent time discussing it here. It's part of my personal story.
Thank you.
And yeah, like I will alternate between saying like suicide and self-termination. And usually when I do say self-termination, people go, what? And I'm like, oh yes, thank you. Because now you're paying attention. But yeah,
can I use that word? That's so impactful. That's
yeah. Because for sometimes like depending on the company, if I am concerned about saying the word and potentially triggering someone. But yeah, like it's something that I start picking up or start saying myself, mostly because it gets people to go, wait, what? You know, like, and then, but yeah, personally, like I'm a big advocate of like, say the big thing and say it without going into a hushed tone, because that's what people tend to do, right? They go, oh, well, he was thinking about suicide. And it's like, we can just say it at the same tone, you know, like, and I used to like my first attempt, obviously not right at the time, but like, you know, I would be like, well, yeah, I mean, I attempted suicide and thank goodness I'm so bad at math because I couldn't take the right amount of pills. And people would be like, and I'm like, you can laugh about it because I'm laughing. And we're talking about it, you know,
changing the energy around it.
Like, you know, like, but I'm like, if I don't talk about it, then like, who's going to talk about it today? Right.
Exactly.
Okay. So, last question. How do you desire to better show up for yourself?
For myself, it's just this continual practice, just reminding myself every morning that all of this is a gift, and this continual to give myself grace and show up every day and continually practice what I'm putting out there into the world, right? To pay attention and be present and own my own wellness so that I can help other people do the same.
That's awesome. Thank you very much for being here, and for sharing your passion and your journey and everything that you're doing. So I'm just going to read this straight off. So Colleen Ryan-Hensley, Binging Sober will be beginning in January of 2023. So I have you at both Armored Grace and then ColleenHensley.com, correct?
ColleenRyan-Hensley.com is going to
Sorry.
be where all of the hashtag Binging Sober community will be tied together there. Yeah.
Okay. So if you listen to this, ignore the Armored Grace thing and just go.
I need to check it out, but no, go to ColleenRyan-Hensley.com. It's HENSLEY.
And if you'll be able to find all of her social media and links on, sorry, my headphones are disappearing on me. You can find all of her social media and links in the show notes, both on the podcast sites and then also on YouTube. And you'll definitely see a few clips of this on my Instagram. So find Colleen, follow her, get ready for January, and let's see if this is something that we can build and make trends. So thank you again very much.
Thank you, Sarah.
Have a great one.